I just came back from the strangest game. I was invited to a party by a friend of a friend, and it wasn't until I arrived there that I found out that my friend had something come up and wouldn't be able to make it. Though I was a bit hesitant, I didn't want to be rude to the friend of my friend, so I knew I had to stay at least for a polite length of time. The reason I was hesitant was because this friend of a friend was a bit weird. Weird in the hot topic sense, where I was reminded of a slightly overweight vampire whenever I saw him. Weird in the poetic sense, where he would occasionally stop in the middle of a sentence, look towards the distance, and say a few rhyming lines about the dark nature of the universe, and then go back to his original sentence, as if there had been no interruption. I was hesitant. Nervous sweat level hesitation. It was different from what I expected, since when I was led into the living room, there were only 2 other people there. I had been expecting an entire assembly of people, but there was only a young man and a young woman sitting on a red velvet couch. The most obvious feature about the young man was not his pale face, long black hair, black eyeliner and mascara, black clothes, or even the odd symbol tattooed on the center of his forehead, but the leash that he held. He had a leather leash attached to a leather collar around the girl's neck. She had hair that had been bleached white, and it looked frail, limp and wispy, as if it would soon start falling out. Her face might have been attractive once, perhaps, but there was too much makeup, and a hollow expression that filled you at once with both pity and despair. My eyes, the wandering little bastards that they are, followed her thin neck down to her substantial cleavage, and further down to her exposed midriff. And that's when I realized that she and the young man were wearing the exact same outfit. My eyes darted between the 2 of them, checking to see that the young man was even wearing the same knee-high boots, the same why did you even bother wearing clothes, tight black spandex pants. The friend of my friend introduced us immediately. "Waffles," he said to me, "this is Pluton." The man who called himself Pluton stood up and extended a hand covered in rings and bracelets. "Mesmerizing," he said, and I took that as a form of greeting. I shook his hand and his eyes widened the moment our flesh made contact, as if I had stung him. He held on to my hand though, and after an extremely uncomfortable 4 seconds, he said, "You have a monumentous aura. I like you." After letting go of my hand, he turned to my friend of a friend and said, "Sanguinatus, what shall we play today?" Sanguinatus, whom I had mistakenly thought was named Thomas, said that we should wait to see if anyone else arrived. We'd wait until he finished preparing refreshments, and then we would start. He then went off to the kitchen, leaving me with a young man and a woman. I looked at the young woman and realized that I hadn't been introduced to her, and was about to ask her name. Pluton cut me off by asking me what I thought about infinity. After a brief moment, I just said I try not to think about it. He started to laugh. Not a laugh I had been expecting from his slightly higher than normal voice. It was a deep, a harsh laugh, as if he were trying to cough up his lungs with each sudden blast. I was actually repulsed to watch him laugh like that, but when he finished, he didn't even bother to acknowledge my look of revulsion. But instead, he smiled. "Yes, the infinity of death is a harsh subject, the only true infinity there is. Oh, how we all try to not dwell upon the deepest infinity, that which tears the mind and damns the soul. I knew I liked you, yes I did." I gave a weak smile. Hopefully this was some weird joke and he just liked to dress funny and pretend he was the creepiest person in the whole world. And then in a moment, he would reveal that he's just a normal guy and I'd be able to spend the evening in a normal fashion. He then asked me what I thought about love. I pretended to think about the question, but instead, I thought about how to avoid answering it. The simplest solution came into my head almost instantly, and I asked him what he thought about it. Perhaps the greatest mistake of my life, he began a speech, one that may have been rehearsed about his views on love. I just stared at him, humming the Power Rangers theme in my head, hoping that I could preserve some sense of my sanity. Love is not a creation, it is an existence, but not one that actually exists. When death and darkness truly meet, then there only does true love really. Just how Descartes proved that something can exist without thinking it does, love is unable to think and thus cannot. Thankfully, by the 1000th or so time that I repeated my mantra, Sanguinatus returned, carrying a tray with a pitcher of iced tea and 2 bowls of chips. Pluton, who mistook me reliving my childhood inside my head for enjoying his speech, apologized for having to cut it short, since he was now rather thirsty. He yanked back on the leash, and without a word, the girl stood up and poured a glass of iced tea, handed it to him, and sat back down. "Do you Catan?" Pluton asked me. "Catan?" I repeated, confused. An instant later, Sanguinatus had taken the box containing Settlers of Catan off his shelf, and showing it to me. Yes, I'd played it once before, and told him so. "Excellent. I think that should be our chosen game for tonight. I always feel that it is best played with 3 people. Pluton said, reclining deep into the couch. 3? But there's 4 of us. Pluton's eyes widened. No, there is only 3. He stood up, yanking the leash as he did so, and the girl gave a small cry of surprise and pain. Dragging the girl behind him, he went into a different room, closed the door, and started shouting at her. "How dare you? How dare you pretend to be human? How fucking dare you? I swear I will kill you." "So, what color do you want to be?" Sanguinatus asked me, as if nothing was happening. I stared at him. Pluton continued to scream at the girl, and the silence within the living room continued. Finally, after briefly glancing at the door, Sanguinatus whispered, "I know it's different, but it's just how they choose to express themselves. Just like you might hold a girl's hand, he chooses to hold a leash. It's not all that different, really." "Blue," I said, picking a nice, happy color. Pluton and the girl returned after a few minutes, and both of them had black lines down their cheeks, signs that tears had been shed. They sat down on the couch, and not by my choice, but by the choice of his pants, I saw that he had an erection, and he made no attempt at hiding it. I was at the point where I just wanted the night to end in a way that I wouldn't anger this sociopath and have him follow me home and gut me while I slept. I began to unpack the board and place them on the coffee table, but Pluton asked me to stop. "I have a better table," he said simply. With a sharp yank of the leash, the girl stood up and then laid down on the table. As she remained there, her pale, flat belly exposed, and I simply stared down at her. Sanguinatus began to arrange the board pieces. For those that don't know, Settlers of Catan uses hexagonal tiles with 6 different kinds of land, and each produces a different kind of resource, except for the desert, which produces nothing, which are placed within a frame depicting water and boats. Made out of thin cardboard, it had a hard time staying in place on most tables, and this table was trying but failing to keep from trembling. Sanguinatus quickly ran out of the room, having started rather low on her abdomen, and Pluton casually lowered her pants to a point where I felt ashamed that she apparently didn't. She was perhaps a single centimeter away from being completely exposed. I opened my mouth in protest, but I realized that Pluton was now breathing rather hard, rather quickly. His eyes were wide to the point where I was scanning the room to find something I could bludgeon him with in order to protect myself. The moment passed, and we each received our settlement and road pieces. We selected where to place our first two settlements, with slight difficulty coming from how our table was shivering. After receiving our first resource cards, we began to play. Settlers of Catan is a game where you complete to build settlements and roads, obtain development cards, and turn settlements into cities. In order to do so, you need resource cards, which comes in 5 different varieties, which needs to be combined in specific ways. For example, wooden brick creates a road, and sheep, grain, and rock gets you a development card. Resources are generated by having settlements placed in the intersections of land tiles. Each land tile has a number between 2 to 12, and on each turn, the dice, 2d6, are rolled. Whatever lands share that number produce a resource, and all settlements that surround that land get resource. Players are expected to trade and negotiate, using the resource cards to barter with other players. It's a game that requires cooperation and competition, trust and betrayal, and has a surprising amount of depth to its strategy. I don't know why I told you all this, because none of that fucking mattered. Having settlements that gave me good access to wood and brick, I was building roads rapidly to a degree where I actually managed to restrict Pluton to a small portion of the board, blocking him with my roads. This is something that's rather difficult to do, and not entirely a great idea, since the remaining player did waste his resources, and now has a large area to settle. Since Pluton had no room for new settlements, his only hope was to upgrade his settlements into cities to get development cards. He was at a heavy disadvantage, and since he would have fewer settlements to produce resources, but he could still win if he had an excellent luck. He did not have great luck. Slowly but surely, he got more and more upset as every dice roll seemed to go against him. On a poor roll, he would place a hand on the girl's neck and squeeze her, choking her until I turned to look at him. Before I could say anything, he would let her go, leaving marks on her skin. By the time I realized the game was purely between me and Sanguinatus, it was too late for me to realize that I was sitting across from a guy who worshipped death and would probably end up killing us all if he lost. Pluton steadily grew more and more violent as the game progressed, digging his fingers into different parts of the girl, slapping her, even tracing thin lines of blood across her skin with a spiked ring. She didn't protest, and even more remarkably, managed to keep the board from shifting too much. This is out of character, but holy shit, that poor girl. I hope she's doing this out of her own free will, because holy fuck. But okay, back to story. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I should do something for the girl, but this was something that she wanted. I didn't know if I would be doing her a favor if I let Pluton win, preventing him from taking out his frustration on her, whether she would actually be unhappy that she would miss out on a chance to be further mistreated. Sanguinatus looked like he'd be the winner of our game, as he had a far better board position. However, he didn't look particularly happy. The game was now just a distraction, something to focus on in order to ignore Pluton getting aroused as he kept abusing the girl. As I tried to look at her, I didn't realize for quite some time that the girl was flushed. She was steadily losing control of her breathing, and the board became more and more messy as she herself was becoming more and more aroused. We continued to play until we were simply going through the motions. Out of character again, this is something I completely understand. I play board games, and sometimes the players can just get a rather painful to play with. So, you know, I totally get this guy. Sanguinatus had clearly won, and we were just waiting for him to obtain the 10 victory points to finish the game. I was making poor trades simply so he would get the resources he needed, but luck wasn't producing what we needed. Finally, after what felt like years, though it had barely been an hour and a half, he finally managed to win the game. There was a brief murmur of congratulations, and then Pluton, unable to contain his frustration, spread apart the girl's legs and then slapped her as hard as he could on her inner thigh. Her abdomen spasmed upwards, spreading pieces everywhere. As she began to gather pieces up while Pluton and Sanguinatus organized them inside the box, I set the alarm on my phone to go off in 3 minutes before quickly placing it back into my pocket. Once the game was put away, Pluton turned to Sanguinatus and told him that he deserved the prize for winning. "You may have her for 2 nights," he told him. "You may do as you wish." Just as Sanguinatus cheerfully accepted, my alarm went off, and I picked up my phone and stepped away from them. I pretended to hold a quiet conversation, and then turned back to them saying that I was really sorry, and that I had to go. Sanguinatus simply said that it was nice I could come, but Pluton looked rather angry. He stood up, yanked on the leash to force her to stand, and then aimed a kick at the girl's leg, making her fall to the carpet. Then, as if he had done nothing of the sort, he walked over to me, extended his hand that we simply must play again sometimes. I gave a false smile and then left the house, leaving the strangest game I've ever played behind me. So, that was me reading Settlers of Catan, a story, and I have no words. I don't even know what to say. Anyway, thank you all for listening for this long. If you guys didn't know, I'm gonna start doing this as a regular thing. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this at the start of the video, but in case I didn't, I'll say it again. Before we end, let me just give a shout out to our 2 Patreon members for this month. We have Zero Has Arrived, and of course, VtubeWaffles. Always a pleasure to see you 2 here. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and I will see you guys next time. If you guys want to see more of me, you guys should check out my Twitch streams. I hold them at 9 PM GMT plus 8. If you guys want to see my stream schedule, you'll have to join the Discord, which the link should be down there. And with that, I will see you all next time. Goodbye!